We're outside the law on this one. So if you come with us, you're a wanted man.
Yeah, well, what else is new?
Greetings, and thanks for joining us here at CBR. Avengers Endgame was the biggest, most emotional experience the MCU had to offer, serving as the grand finale for several of the franchise's biggest characters. After 2008's Iron Man laid the groundwork, everything wrapped up 11 years later with a suitably big culmination of everything the MCU had to offer. Let's take a closer look at the rise and fall of Marvel. Part 1, The Rise. 2008's Jon Favreau directed Iron Man was an unheralded success. At the time of the film's release, Robert Downey Jr. was a risk, but he was instantly received to warm, critical reception for his portrayal of Tony Stark, the central figure of the MCU's first several phases. In the beginning, Marvel found massive success with the egotistical inventor whose decision to turn from dubious business dealings to a life devoted to stopping the bad guys, but still had a ways to go before finding its footing. With the inevitable Iron Man 2 and the first Thor film, released in 2010 and 2011, the MCU was beginning to take hold with an ambitious strategy for pumping out multiple interconnected films each year. The first Thor introduced the world to Chris Hemsworth's iteration of the character, who was good enough to warrant further exploration and development. Then, on July 11, 2011, Captain America, the first Avenger, came out, and the groundwork was laid for the Avengers. Its trickiest aspects were honoring multiple heroes, setting the stage for future installments, and delivering a wholly satisfying story. Needless to say, Avengers was a hit, and Marvel proved that it could provide films that represented its ambitions and delivered enough in the way of character and spectacle to draw audiences to theaters. Phase 2 offered Iron Man 3, Thor: The Dark World, both of which highlighted the smaller stories that were possible. Most importantly, Phase 2 was all about expanding its scope. The greatest film of this era is Captain America: The Winter Soldier, directed by Anthony and Joe Russo. With The Winter Soldier, the Russos brought espionage, intrigue, and the return of Bucky Barnes. The film represents the first time the MCU was able to bring in a robust backstory and give an MCU film the weight of a sharp, action-packed political thriller. With this aspect of the MCU solidified, the Russos becoming the go-to team for Captain America, a crucial piece of the expanding universe was now in place. Phase 2 had much more to offer with the appearance of James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy, a ragtag group of space-traveling heroes whose individual idiosyncrasies were the first time that the MCU successfully integrated humor into its DNA. Shortly thereafter, Ant-Man was released, which at the time was met with some wariness since its original director, Edgar Wright, left the project before filming could begin. Luckily, Peyton Reed nailed the project and offered fans Paul Rudd's now iconic take on the character. Phase 3 began with Captain America: Civil War, which introduced audiences to the MCU versions of Black Panther and Spider-Man. The film also set the scene for the fractured dynamic between Captain America and his followers, and Iron Man, along with his followers. Phase 3 was the first moment that everything seemed to click. Captain America became the Russos' project, Ant-Man became Peyton Reed's, Spider-Man, John Watts, Black Panther, Ryan Coogler, and the Guardians of the Galaxy, James Gunn. The most important risk that Kevin Feige and the MCU took was handing the property over to Taika Waititi, who was better known at the time for his humanely absurd comedies. With all of the most important pieces in place, the Avengers were set to face their biggest threat, Thanos. With the electrifying action and rich introspection of Civil War, it was essential to keep the Russo brothers on board for what would become the biggest Marvel films to date. The two-part phase-ending films, Avengers: Infinity War and Avengers: Endgame. Through a marvel of engineering, both films had an immense scope and found a clever way of highlighting the characters that audiences were most keen on seeing on screen. Despite the snap and its fallout, everyone was given their own smaller arcs within the two-parter. Most importantly, Endgame was the grand finale 11 years in the making, and it exceeded all fan expectations. At the most important moment, all pertinent heroes had their arcs honored, and the end meant saying goodbye to some fan-favorite characters. But there was no way that Endgame was going to just end the MCU, and new troubles began. Let us know your favorite high points of the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far, and join us for part 2 discussing the fall of Marvel.